Hello and welcome. An interview has been circulating which has been causing some concern amongst fans. In this video I will talk about this interview and address the issues. I will also talk about other things that will not appear in Dune. If you are new to the channel, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe and click the bell so that you can be first to be notified of new content. And thank you to my Patreons for your support. Now let's get into the Dune news. Now, I didn't even want to address these issues, but because so many people sent in this video and so many people were asking questions and were genuinely seeming to be worried about the Dune film and what was going to happen in the Dune film, so I wanted to address these issues and try to help people make some sense of what was said in this interview. Now the interview has disappeared and it's been made private, and I think it's because it was picking up a lot of traction. IndieWire featured it and other news outlets, so I guess the Dune production didn't want this known or exposed or out there for people to know or for people to misunderstand, because there were some answers in that interview that could come across as negative. So let's get stuck into what was actually said in this interview. So the supervising art director, Tom Brown, was interviewed by Kids First. I was really happy to see this interview because it was getting the youth involved in the media and learning about media production and how to create films. So I respect Tom very much for going on to the show and talking to them. That's the first thing I'd like to say. Now, when he was asked about the sandworms in Dune, he says, "Sadly, there are no worms in part 1. He also says that they are touched upon in a dream sequence in part 1 and that they built a piece of the worm, but he says we don't use any worm technology in part 1, that's coming in part 2. So when people heard these answers in the interview, they assumed that this meant that there would be no sandworms in Dune at all. And so this kind of caused a little panic, and people started to worry that Dune wasn't going to be the Dune that they had imagined. And sandworms, in most discussions of Dune, sandworms come up, people saying, "Oh, I cannot wait to see what Denis Villeneuve's sandworms look like. I can't wait to see Shai Hulud, etc, etc." So the sandworms are a big deal. They're the iconic symbolism of Dune. Everybody, when they think of Dune, thinks of sandworms. So I'd like to talk about this, and I'd like to say what we can expect of the sandworms in Dune Part 1. Now you have to imagine Dune done right. So right that it is done gracefully, like a faithful adaptation. We also have to remember that Dune Part 1 will cover half of the book. So talking about exactly what half is going to be covered is important to understand how much of the sandworms we're going to see in Dune Part 1. Now if we look at it as half the book, there aren't that many scenes of sandworms in the first half of the book. They're talked about, they can come in dream sequences like they say they're going to do in the Dune movie Part 1. There's of course the scene with the ornithopter and the spice harvester and them escaping the worm, saving the people from the spice harvester. And then after that we have the scene where a worm is chasing Jessica and Paul as they run in the desert. So there's that scene as well. So that's just 2 scenes so far. So there aren't that many sandworm scenes to be expecting. I think the way this interview needs to be understood is the same way that we see the aliens in the first Alien movie. Now the xenomorph, we don't see the xenomorph fully. We just see glimpses of its face, its body, its tail, especially its mouth. We don't fully see the xenomorph. And that's part of what makes Aliens so intriguing and interesting, is the idea of less is more. We see glimpses, we see the idea of this beast, but we don't actually see it fully. So I think the sandworms in Dune are going to be like the xenomorphs of Alien, and I think that's what's going to make it special. Of course, the xenomorph had to be designed fully so that they would know what it looks like, but we don't see it fully on film. It's the same for the sandworms. The sandworms have been developed, the sandworms have been created and designed fully, but we're going to see glimpses of the sandworm, hopefully to induce the horror of these beasts, the horror of these giant monsters under the depths. And this is an idea that Frank Herbert was very interested in, the idea of the mindless beast under the depths. So if anything, doing it this way is book accurate. Now I'm going to go into detail of the sandworms in Denis Villeneuve's Dune, based on what I know. Now I know there will be the Spice Harvester scene where they get saved, because we've seen pictures of this already with Paul Atreides. But how much we will see of the sandworms in this moment, it's probably just going to be the mouth, and it will be like a similar scene in David Lynch's Dune, where you just see the mouth, you don't really see the sandworm itself. Then we'll have a scene where the sandworm pursues Paul and Jessica as they run in the desert. So there will be that, and then we will have a glimpse of the sandworms in a shot which reminds me of a scene in Star Wars. And that will be all for part 1. Now we may get to see more of a fuller sandworm in the dream sequence, or the part of the sandworm which they built, which Tom Brown mentions, but he says there will be no technology, so they won't be using the CGI of the sandworm, so there probably won't be a full moving sandworm shot. We're obviously going to see the jaws of the beast, we have to, they appear almost twice. But I hope they show it in a way and edit it in a way that induces fear and tension and creates that beautiful tension that Denis Villeneuve knows how to create. So couple all of that with a less is more approach to the sandworms, it could create something very special for Dune. He was talking about the sandworms from a visual effects perspective, but there may be practical effects of the sandworms and even animatronics. There are some things that we aren't actually going to see in Dune Part 1, and they involve some characters. We've heard nothing of Fade, and we've heard nothing about Princess Irulan or Shaddam IV. And people have been going off of the IMDb that actress Gloria Obiano is going to play Hara, but as far as I know, Hara isn't in the Dune film, so I believe that she's playing the Shadout Mapes. As for Fade, I will cover that in another video. So I hope that you're confident about the sandworms in Dune at least, and I think we need to really trust in Denis Villeneuve's vision of how he's going to portray the sandworms in his Dune film. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like this video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and click the bell to be first to be notified about new content. If you'd like to support this channel, you can support me on Patreon. And of course, thanks to all my Patreons for your support. Until next time, see you soon.